The next story is from unhappy_taste. Taught a lesson to my idiot boss who tried to get credit and promotion for a software I made and fired me over it. I was working in a finance company last year. One day, I proposed to my manager that since I have a computer programming background, I know that for that manual job XYZ, automation can be done using some new tech and it'll reduce 500 man-hours per week. He also has some tech background, so he says it hasn't been done because it can't be done and behaved with condescension. I, being bullheaded and with to prove and CV to build, developed it on my own, in my own time, on my home computer, then compiled it into a binary, single executable file without code, and gave it to him. He got permission from IT department to run it on his computer and was utterly sure that it won't work, and he would get to laugh at me. But it did. Even though the software works, idiot manager took it as an insult somehow and banned me from using it, giving some inane reason that doing it manually was much more effective, which was a bummer because it was working beautifully. Fast forward a quarter or so, my manager was hard-pressed for some brownie points during appraisal, so in examples of showing initiative, he used my software, but without mentioning me. Some super senior manager took notice and gave him a promotion and a raise. Now, instead of being a sensible guy and coming clean to get code from me, he calls me in his cabin, behaves rudely, and says that I need to submit the code for that software. I asked him why. You had said we won't be using it? He's like, either you submit the code or you'll be fired. I was already fed up of being treated like shit by this stain just because he was somehow jealous. So I said, F off. I won't submit the code. I know enough law to know that you can't sue me, and I resign. I came to know later through my colleagues that this is what he must have wanted, so that he could take the entire credit himself without dispute. Little did he know, there was a malicious code module hidden in that executable file, which checked for a 1 or 0 on a remote GitHub repository every time it was run. If 1 or no network, do everything as required, but if a 0 is received, that's emergency signal. I added that little code because his behavior was very to begin with, and I didn't trust him. I was planning to remove it after its official implementation, which never happened. So I went ahead and changed that 1 to 0 after I was fired, to ensure no one used it without my permission. Although he couldn't get the code, he did have the executable file, and I was also not in the company anymore. So in his arrogance, he called a meeting with his boss, his colleagues, and my whole team to show them a demo of this awesome software he had made. He was using it on his laptop every day without my knowledge. But today, the 1 was 0, so as soon as he pressed enter, nothing happened. Pressed enter again, nada. Suddenly, his laptop was frozen and nothing was working anymore. It took him a while to realize something fishy was going on, and then he took out the laptop battery to switch it off. By then, all the Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files were encrypted, and the executable had erased itself out of existence. I used the same code, without the malicious module, to get a better job at another company, where I'm much more appreciated and the job is also fun. Then the whole COVID thing happened, and now I'm cozily working from my home. My previous colleagues of that company keep telling me that they are being forced to go to office. So somehow it was the best decision I had made accidentally. That idiot boss's promotion and raise got cancelled because he couldn't produce what he promised. He also got reprimanded for losing a lot of important company data, which he attributed to some unknown virus, which wasn't believable because no one's allowed to put anything on those office laptops without security clearance from IT department. He called me one night, drunk, angry, threatening me that he knows what I did. I feigned ignorance and quoted something like, "It happens to people," and blocked his number. But I had to tell someone about this flawless victory over stupid without being implicated, so here it is. Update. Hello, people. Thanks for all the likes and comments. I love you guys. I'm overwhelmed, to say the least. There are some questions which keep coming up again and again, so I'm answering them here in the post. I tried to answer each of them in the comments individually, but now I have to sleep. Q1. Being a finance-related company, they generally have stringent security measures. How could IT department allow the manager to load the program on his laptop, and why didn't they check its network communication or run it through an antivirus? A1. This is not the kind of company a lot of people here are envisioning. Yes, they have security measures like blocked USB ports, firewalls, etc. in place, but just so that if a client visit happens, they can qualify. Most of the employees in IT department are highly underpaid, sick of red tapeism and blame games, so if it's not a very weird request, they generally just ask for an email from project manager and load whatever software they need, especially custom ones, because they can't really verify them. Horrible practice, I know, but no one cares there. If it happens, which is quite frequent there, everyone starts showing their email copies to everyone and it becomes a mess. Another reason is that the financial data which these guys process is historical, and hence not very sensitive. Obviously they pretend to care, but even if someone stole it, it's not like some sensitive insider trading info which has very high value. Maybe that's why no one cares much. Regarding firewall restrictions, they are also quite lax. Like I mentioned in the comments, they keep blocking websites when they realize people are wasting time on them. Common time waster-banned websites being FB, Instagram, Reddit, most porn sites, most games sites, etc. There have been instances when people have been able to open a site if it's quite new. Once it's known, it's blocked promptly. Obviously, websites like Stack Overflow, GitHub, Bitbucket are not blocked because they don't see them as time wasters and someone somewhere keeps requesting access to them for productive work. They did run the program through a basic antivirus. It didn't show up as suspicious and there can be a lot of reasons for it. Primary being the antivirus. I keep checking it on my comp and it's not detected there either. Maybe because the code doesn't seem familiar enough to it. Maybe because I used Golang. Maybe because they just suck. I don't know. And I am not an expert in antiviruses, but the ones I've tried in VM are Quick Heal, McAfee, and Norton. And all three of them don't show anything. That company was using Quick Heal. Q2. Why did you have to encrypt the files? Why couldn't you just leave it at self-destruction? It's a felony. It's a crime. A2. Yes, guys, I know it's a crime. And sadly, I don't really have a fancy excuse for this. I was just plain cocky and angry. I felt I wouldn't get caught, and that guy was up my ass from a long time. I instinctively knew he would do some weird when I'd hand it over to him, so I wanted to teach him a lesson. If he did some If he would have implemented it, I would have replaced it with the non-exploit version and no one would have known. If he would have given me a sane reason not to implement it, that also would have been fine. Even if he wouldn't have fired me, shown coerced resignation, I might not have triggered it from outside because of the risks. But when he stooped so low as to claim it as his own while getting rid of me, I lost all sense of self-preservation, left the company and just let it go. Kaboom, I knew that it had only encrypted the docs he was working on, and nothing more than that, and the general protocol is to just format the affected laptop afterwards. No one really bothers there to trace the source or to notify authorities. Random malware virus cases have happened there before. Also, due to my personal history with that guy, I kinda knew what he would do and what he wouldn't. Having said that, a lot of could have gone sideways, and although I was super careful at each step, it could have turned into a horrible nightmare. Anyone getting inspired by this, do not do this, please. Q3. How do you know what happened in that meeting? A3. My ex-colleagues told me everything over drinks later. They are unaware of my involvement. Q4. Can you get caught due to your GitHub repo, as they can trace the homing signal to that? A4. It's an anonymous repo made with a fake email ID. It just consists some garbage generic-looking HTML text with a YN hidden in it. I never log in or access it directly, and through unlikely, even if GitHub saw its access logs, it'd never trace back to my actual IP. Q5. Sometimes you say you were fired and sometimes you say you resigned. A5. I was asked to resign. I didn't have any choice. It's equivalent to getting fired. I chose to resign peacefully because I already had my eyes on another company which needed me. I did not want this black mark on my CV and did not want to keep working by telling on this guy to the seniors and creating an even hostile work environment. The job was not worth it anyway. Q6. How long did you take to make it? A6. 3-4 months. Q7. What tech stack did you use? A7. Golang for coding, Linux as OS, some external libs but mostly STlib provided everything I needed. Compiled into a single statically linked binary targeted for Windows 10. Q8. Why couldn't you just sell it and get rich? A8. It's not that easy. It'd have taken years of convincing, security compliance and things I generally wasn't in a mood to get into. Getting a job in another company and then implementing it there was easier. Got a good package because of it. I'm building up on it so that I can start my own consulting firm in a few years when I have some senior perspective of tech plus finance. Q9. Final aftermath of the manager? A9. He was given an offer of promotion and raise, contingent on implementation of this software, which never happened, so the offer got cancelled and he had to go through a lot of embarrassment. The reprimands I talked about were mostly because some client meetings got delayed due to the missing Excel and PPT files that he had to make again over next 2 weeks. I guess he must have had some versions of backups in mail. I came to know that he was able to reproduce them again eventually. Q10. Can it ever be traced back to you? A10. Since I manually copied the file on my manager's USB drive, then he himself went and got the approval for its installation on his laptop, saying that he was the file owner and responsible for it, and then he himself executed it. In the process encrypting, deleting only his own files, I don't come in the picture at all. Even if tomorrow he tells the truth to everyone, there's nothing that points to me. I've erased its existence from my side. All I have to say, I don't know what the f this guy's talking about. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. In case you think it's fake, well, too bad. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. The revenge was perfect and deeply satisfying, and it was executed subtly but strategically. It was a bitter lesson for the credit thief manager. The downfall of the manager was called on by his own arrogance and toxic behavior. The next story is from Ambulance Driver 2. Jackass manager gets his comeuppance. Entirely too many years ago, I started to work at a fast food company. Let's call it Southern State Not Baked Poultry. Southern State Not Baked Poultry wasn't a bad first job. I was 16, and the assistant manager at that location was my best friend's stepdad. So we took what was tedious and menial and tried to make it fun. He was actually a really good manager and genuinely cared about the people who worked for him. We would do silly stuff before the store opened while we were doing prep. He would have music playing loudly from his office. As long as everything got done and done well, he really didn't care if we had fun doing it. We'll call him Larry. This story is not about him, though. This story is about our store manager. We'll call him Tim. Tim was the exact opposite of our assistant manager. Everything had to be taken seriously. Fun was outlawed. I genuinely hated working with Tim. Tim was an egocentric, power-hungry, petty little man with delusions of grandeur because he was a manager for Southern State Not Baked Poultry. Tim's approach to managing was to work the employee until they burned out. When they did, fire them and hire someone else. Needless to say, morale when Tim worked was in the garbage. Tim hated that crews would prefer working with Larry instead of him. He hated that crews had fun when Larry was working. He hated that our store's numbers were always better when Larry worked. Mostly, he just hated everyone. But one thing that he absolutely hated was a silly little thing Larry did. If it was before the restaurant opened, he would stick his tongue between his teeth and lower lip and shout out a "hi" name to whichever employee had just walked in. It sounded absolutely ridiculous. I would always do the same thing back, which ended up sounding something like, "Hi, Wowie." A perfect example of what an ass Tim was is this. There was a young woman who, due to a variety of stresses, attempted to commit suicide after a particularly grueling shift working with Tim. After she had recovered, she came back for her last paycheck, and Larry was working. Not a coincidence. She called the store to find out what day he was working. So Larry sat her down out in the lobby, bought her lunch, brought her last check out, and sat and talked with her for about an hour. It was after the lunch rush, and he had the time. So he made sure she was doing okay now, talked about whatever she wanted to talk about. By the time she left, she was smiling, but had tears on her cheeks. She had never had someone just sit and listen and let her talk out everything that was going on. Well, the next day, Tim had come in and hauled Larry into the office. His words, and I can quote them exactly, because the office was a tiny little cube with no ceiling, just a place to stash paperwork and a computer, were, "The next time the queen comes in, tell her to do it right next time." So now you have a clear picture of exactly how petty and vindictive this little man was. Here is where the revenge starts. We were scheduled to have the regional and national bigwigs for Southern State not-baked poultry come through our area for an annual inspection. Tim had his eyes set on being one of those bigwigs, at least for the region. Why wouldn't he be? He did everything by the book. That automatically made him a good manager, at least in his eyes. Everything had a checklist and a procedure and a set of written instructions in the book, and if you couldn't meet the expectations set forth in the book, well, Tim would yell at you and berate you. Because that's how a manager manages, you see. Well, before the bigwigs got to our store, we knew what day they would be coming. Several of us had agreed that on the day they came through, we would all screw up just enough to get Tim to blow his cool. Because our regional manager and the national bigwigs all believed that Southern State not-baked poultry was a family company, and that employees were valuable team members. The day in question arrived, and the bigwigs were there for their big tour. Whoops, one of the fryers hadn't had the oil replaced last night. Oh look, the shaker table hadn't been cleaned. Darn it, we've got way too much coleslaw made up and we won't get through it before we have to toss it. Crap, we don't have enough chicken poultry in the cooker to fulfill the lunch rush. Man, someone forgot to preheat the second cooker. You get the picture. After the second time, I took a minute to long to get a basket of chicken poultry into the cooker. Tim absolutely lost his yelling, cursing, throwing things. He actually physically pushed me away from the breading station in the middle of the lunch rush, while the regional manager and several bigwigs from National stood there. While we had a line several people deep at both cash registers and a lobby full of people eating. Tim stood there, gulping like a fish. His mouth was moving like he was trying to say something, but no sounds were coming out. The room was absolutely quiet, other than the beeping of a fryer that was done. I looked at Tim. This was the moment we had all been gearing up for. I looked down at where he had pushed me, a set of handprints in flour on my chest, and I cut loose into him, yelled at him that I quit, took off my apron, and threw it at him. Told him I was tired of his abuse, of his poor management, of how he single-handedly drove morale through the floor every time he walked through the doors, how he was a crappy excuse for a manager, and that if he didn't have Larry and a couple of good shift leads, he'd have driven the location out of business a long time ago. All the colour drained from his face, and he bolted to the office cube. The national and regional folks ended up comping everyone's meals that were in the restaurant. Interestingly enough, Tim was not fired, but he was demoted to assistant manager. Larry was promoted to manager. About 10 years later, I was working at my current job as an EMT. We had just dropped a patient off at the hospital that was across the street from the same restaurant, and my partner was hungry, so we drove across the street and pulled in. Now, I hadn't set foot in that restaurant since the day I had quit. But lo and behold, who is working the counter? But Tim himself. And his name tag still shows assistant manager. The restaurant was empty since it was between lunch and dinner time, and I just couldn't help myself. I stuck my tongue between my teeth and lower lip and as loud as I could shouted out, "Hi, Twim!" Haven't been back there since, but that was around 12 years ago. I'm willing to bet he's still just the assistant manager there. The revenge was perfect and executed strategically. Tim deserved the demotion he got. People are the foul eggs in the corporate sector. Instead of encouraging a suicidal employee, he made cruel comments about him. Nothing can be meaner than this. BTW, hi Twim, was personal.